So welcome everyone. This is actually part of our Keto for Lipedema Worldwide Summit. This came out of the depth and wonderful interviews that my co-host Leslyn and I did. And I'll tell you a little more about it in a moment. But we decided that this year we would include live keynote speakers as webinars. So we're in the midst, we're actually on day 2 of a 10-day summit, really looking at biohacking keto for lipedema. And I am really delighted that Dr. Cywes, so how this came to be is we interviewed Dr. Cywes, and it was such a great interview. It was actually a very deep and very profound and very exciting conversation that went way over the time we allotted by like 20 or 30 minutes. And so at the end we said, would you be willing to come and do a live keynote? We'll do a live Q&A. And so here we are. And thus starts a new aspect of our summits. So he's going to be speaking about lipedema and carbohydrates. His expertise is in looking at the carbohydrates as an addiction, how it affects obesity, and what we're dealing with, and how to sustain and maintain a weight loss. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I introduce him in a little more depth. But that's what we're here for, this is what we're doing. And since we have so many, we have over 1,000 people registered for the summit, and more are coming in every day, which is great. So quite a few new people. So I like to just give some context. So what is lipedema? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Well, lipedema is a fat disorder that results in disproportionate fat distribution. As you can see, this woman is a classic lipedema, though in a minute I'll say lipedema, everyone can show lipedema in a different way, but this is what would be considered classic. And she has a very small torso, but her hips and her thighs and her legs and even her arms are quite swollen with fat. And that fat distribution is considered one of the key symptoms of lipedema. So lipedema is little known, generally misdiagnosed. It is a fat disorder. It is primarily in women, and it results in localized painful fat in the lower body, mostly thighs, hips, and in some cases the upper arms. Left untreated and unmanaged, it progresses and can worsen, leading to lymphedema and eventual immobility. It's also in stages. So lipedema, this is stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's a lot of material on this online, and our website has a lot of it. I'll simply say this is not the same woman, but given our ability to manage and treat our own lipedema is what can stop the progression. A lot of what we're doing is trying to stop and in some cases reverse the progression. So just a little bit about me and why I'm here and why I'm doing this. I produced and directed the documentary, The Disease They Call Fat. I was the founder and co-director of the Lipedema Project and Lipedema Simplified. I was one of 10 co-authors of a book on lipedema, The Disease They Call Fat, an overview for clinicians. I have my Ph.D. in psychology with a focus on media. Most of my research has looked at the way the media treats women, and especially around body image. But more importantly, and the reason why I do pretty much most of what I do is because I have lipedema, I have lymphedema, and I've struggled with the obesity for over 60 years. I should change that. It's probably at this point closer to over 65 years. But anyway, it's been a constant challenge for me. And so I understand those of us who have challenges in this area. The thing is, this is from the book, and it basically takes some of the literature and talks to that lipedema fat is resistant to diet and exercise. And no matter what most of us have tried, ultimately it doesn't work. And even calorie restricted diets or any kind of rigorous exercise, compression, even bariatric surgery. So I was much heavier than on the left. I was over 300 pounds at my heaviest. I was down to close to 175, which for me was tiny. I was so happy at that weight. But when lipedema hit, my weight started to go out of control again, and nothing I could do worked. And the one thing that really, I don't know, motivated me, I have so many little quotes that I share, but this thing that nothing is impossible. I just have this belief that with strong enough intention, that there are answers, you just have to find them. And sometimes you have to go through a lot of possible solutions that don't in the end work out. But I have to say, it was a turning point for me. I was in the midst of trying everything. And in 2015, the National Institutes of Health, which in the US, the NIH, is considered the top collaborative around research for health issues, they sponsored the first ever symposium for the lymphatic system. It was a big deal. There were people that I had met throughout Europe. It was international. Dr. Roxon from Stanford was one of the people that worked with the NIH to get it going. LEARN, which is the Lymphedema Education and Research Network, yada, yada, yada. It was amazing. And at that symposium, I met Leslyn Keith, and that was a turning point. She was presenting her research. She had done a study on a ketogenic way of eating for a group of patients with lymphedema and obesity. She had had significant results using a keto way of eating. She had, she was just in the process of finishing up writing up her study. We met, we had a conversation, and both of us looked at each other and basically said, we think this could work for lipedema. And it took us quite a number of months. That was in September 2015. And by the summer of 2016, we were trying a pilot group. We did a webinar much like this. And we started a conversation, and we started a group which has grown to well over 8,000 members with incredible success. Basically, for those of you, a number of you are coming new to the summit, keto is real food, low carb, moderate protein, and high fat. No Franken foods, no sugar, no flour, no grains. There were some no's that were really challenging, like no fruit. That one was difficult. But for me, and this is one of the things and one of the reasons we asked Dr. Cywes to come and speak with you all, is that each one of us is different. We have to learn how to observe and moderate what's going on with us. So ultimately, the question isn't, you know, what do you eat? It's what's the right way of eating for you, for you. This was a meal that I had when I was at a conference in Italy. It's very Italian, very wonderful. I now know that I have limited my vegetables more than I ever thought possible, and I'm as close to carnivore after talking to Dr. Cywes, which he'll talk about. So it's really learning what your body needs. And I love this quote, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And that's really what we're here to talk about. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cywes. And also just say, Dr. Cywes has been in the low-carb world, is one of the speakers that goes to many of the conferences, has a background as a pediatric surgeon, and as an obesity medicine specialist who does bariatric surgery. And it was through working with his patients that he began to introduce and support his patients in weight loss that didn't always include surgery. So I'm going to let him take it from here. I'm going to switch over. Give me 1 second. I'm going to switch over to the other presentation, which is here. And so whenever you want me to move on, Dr. Cywes, I will just keep moving the presentation. So thank you for being here, and I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. Let me just check, is my audio good?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So my name is Rob Cywes. I've been in the obesity space, in the carbohydrate space since the early 1990s, when I kind of stumbled into this with work I was doing in Toronto toward my PhD, looking at how the liver metabolizes sugar. And at that time, we were just beginning to understand that what we knew about obesity was completely wrong. For the prior 30 to 50 years, we'd lived under a hypothesis called the lipid heart hypothesis. And we'll talk about this in a second. And in the 1990s, I realized in the work I was doing in Toronto with my PhD that was just wrong. But it was impossible to swim uphill and or upstream. And it's taken us 30 years of work to slowly evolve to a point where we now, we've understood this for a long time, but now only really recently getting some traction internationally and getting some traction with people that have tried everything and have really failed to be successful at standard paradigms. So let's go through some of the linkages between all of these topics. One little caveat, you'll see my address and my websites, and you can Google me and get a lot of podcasts from me. They're out there, they're free. But the most important aspect about me is I topped out around 300 pounds. And so I have been obese myself. I didn't have lipedema, but I topped out at 300 pounds. I've lost about 90 pounds and kept that off for around 17 to 18 years so far. So I kind of stand on both sides of of my office. I'm both a patient as well as a physician. So I do understand, and I have been in that big body myself, and it continues to be a strong battle. So let's go ahead with the next slide. This just tells us I'm going to briefly go through my understanding and give some insights and thoughts about lipedema, because the reality is we just don't know. But there are some comparators and some thoughts. We'll then go through my understanding of obesity from a mental health perspective. And I think that's probably the single most important thing for people to understand, is that the whole world is focused on weight loss. And weight loss is about calories. If you reduce your caloric consumption, you lose weight. And you can do massive weight loss, but regain it all back. Obesity is different than weight loss. Obesity is a behavioral problem, not a calorie problem. And unless you deal with both, you're not ever going to completely successfully transform yourself. And we'll talk quite a bit about that through the talk today. We're going to look at carbohydrates, whether they're food or drugs, and we'll look at obesity, as I said, from a lifestyle perspective. And then we'll start talking about, okay, I understand this, I own this, the description that you've given me resonates with me. How do I start? How do I begin to deal with this? How do I treat myself? And that'll be the back end of the talk. Let's go ahead with the next slide. So let's look at lipedema itself. Lipedema is really, as Catherine said, a genetically based disease that defines regional fat deposition to the lower limbs. And I grew up in Southern Africa, and in fact, come from a farming area, which, if you look at the picture in the middle, is a Khoi son or a so-called Bushman person. And the women there all, as part of the feature of their culture, of their tribe, have buttock and lower leg lipedema. Everybody has that. And I remember growing up as a young child that this was a normal part of that cultural environment. And the top half of these women were very skinny. They were subsistence farmers or hunter-gatherers. And yet the lower areas were incredibly fat. And yet when that group of patients, when that group of people went through tough times, when they were basically under conditions of hunger and starvation, the very last thing, but it did happen, is that lipedema went away. So that's kind of something that's come around to me again as Catherine and I have talked about this. The other example, classic example in nature, is a camel. A camel has genetic deposition, depending on the type of camel, the one hump or two hump camel. You see the one hump camel on the screen, but in the top left. But that camel is well fed and has a very large hump. What's interesting is the rest of the camel is not very fat. All the fat, that hump, first of all, is not made of water, it's made of fat. And the second thing about camels is their spine is straight. That spine is not up into the hump. That hump is a specific regional deposition of fat that camel accumulates at times of abundance, so that at lean times it can lose the weight. And it will use that weight for energy. And if you look at the picture at the bottom, that is a camel. If you look, you can see its ribs. It's clearly starved. And look what's happened. The hump is almost completely gone. Not completely. There's a little hump there, but pretty much now you can see the straight spine, and you can see a small, tiny amount of residual hump. The way I look at those camels is that the one on the bottom here probably reflects more the early stages of lipedema, or maybe the early potential genetic stages that you might see in a teenage girl. And I'm a pediatric surgeon. I see a lot of teenage girls, and it's become very evident to me that you can predict, even though they don't have wide, heavy hips yet, they have the potential look of that early stage of lipedema. And you know, if they, as they go through maturation, through adulthood, they're going to accumulate weight in that particular distribution. So I think that if we understand it, and there are some nature similarities in nature where this is a defined deposition of fat to a specific area. And I'm going to circle back to that in a second with one of the next slides. Lymphedema, on the other hand, no, let's go back up just for a second. Lymphedema, on the other hand, is an accumulation of fluid in the lower legs or in other parts of the body. It can be the arm after breast surgery. And in lipedema, in the later stages, when there's blockage of lymphatics, you can get lymphedema as well. Lymphedema can be congenital or acquired. And then lipedemia, there's actually an I missing at the end over here. Lipedemia is excess circulating fat in the blood. Completely different disease. Yet all three of these can occur simultaneously in the same person. And that can be very confusing for physicians who don't understand the disease. So if you can help your doctors to understand the disease, help them to sort out these different nomenclatures, because they need to understand if they're going to help. The next factor for me that's important is that stage 1 lipedema is genetic. And unfortunately, because of that, it is unlikely to completely go away. But I think if most people can be in stage 1, having experienced stages 2 to 4, that represents such a major improvement. But I don't know whether, with the techniques we're going to describe and the strategies we're going to describe in a few minutes, whether it can completely go away, but it can get back to that level of maybe those teenage and younger girls. Stage 2 to 4, I believe, is acquired. And the reason why that's important is because if something is acquired, it can be fixed. You really can't fix the genetic side, but you can, I believe, with hard work, fix the acquired stages and get back to stage 1. So we'll talk about that, and it's important to understand what you can and can't do with regards to the genetics and some of the behavioral and other management strategies. So that's an important distinction. Go ahead, we can go to the next slide. So as we in the ketogenic arena have looked to various hunter-gatherer societies, one of the common ones that people in North America have looked to are the Eskimo or the Inuit folks. And first of all, if you look at the environment they live in, and all these animals come from the environment they live in, if you look at the walrus, that walrus has a huge padding of fat. The caribou below that is trunkily fat. In other words, its trunk is very fat, its neck has got a lot of fat on it, but its legs are skinny and its face is skinny. And then if you look at the whale on the right that's been slaughtered, there's this huge layer of fat under the skin of the whale. And yet the tail and the functional parts have no fat accumulation. So we know environmentally that animals who live in very cold climates will accumulate fat globally to protect their vital organs. And we see that with Eskimos, that even though they're not unhealthy, they accumulate fat, particularly in the winter, as that global layer of insulation. And if you look at the typical Eskimo Inuit person, their fat is everywhere. On the flip side of that, the Khoisan person that I showed a little while ago, they live in the Kalahari Desert. They live in a very, very hot, dry climate. And yes, there is survival advantage to accumulating fat. But if they accumulated fat globally like an Eskimo, they would get heat exhaustion very quickly. So what they do is genetically and evolutionarily have accumulated fat in very, very specific areas. We know that from these hunter-gatherer tribes that have been around for a long, long time, tens of thousands of years. I'm not certain whether that correlation with lipedema and the genetics of lipedema can be made, but certainly it's worth looking at and worth thinking about. I just don't have the knowledge. But we certainly, in various populations around the world, hunter-gatherer populations, see that. I think the other critical thing, whether you're looking at these animals, whether you're looking at Eskimos, whether you're looking at the Bushmen or the Khoi, that is not fat. Yes, it is fat in terms of being lipids, but it is not obese fat. It wasn't accumulated in a harmful, toxic, or dangerous way. Those people are incredibly healthy. Yes, they have a higher BMI, but that fat is a necessary part of their genetics and of their environmental survival. So I call that accumulation of fat as opposed to obesity, which is the scourge in this country. And it's also important to make that distinction. But as we studied these groups of people, the first thing we found is that they are incredibly healthy, despite the fact that they're a little bit heavy. And their diet is fat. By far the predominant calorie source of an Inuit is fat. Up to 80% of the calories they consume, the rest being protein, and there's an incredibly small amount of carbohydrates in their diet. So therefore, in a healthy population, hunter-gatherer Eskimos on the ice, it is perfectly plausible and in fact very healthy not to eat carbohydrates. So this is kind of our backstory, and the Inuit population is often discussed in the ketogenic movement from a dietary perspective. But there was a piece that they completely miss out on when they look at these hunter-gatherer populations. It's ubiquitously true in first world or hunter-gatherer populations. Let's go to the next slide. And that is this, that when you look at Eskimos as parents, it's an amazing thing that before Inuit children are taught how to hunt and work, they are taught how to behave. Are we able to get rid of, let me just see if I can do, there we go. I'm just trying to get rid, there we go. Okay. So before Inuit children are taught how to hunt and work, they are taught how to behave with others. Traditional Inuit parenting is incredibly nurturing and tender. And if you took all of the parenting styles around the world and ranked them by their gentleness, the Inuit approach would likely rank near the top. They live in the harshest of climates, and yet they are very gentle as a species, as a population. The way children respond to stress, to situations that would cause anger and anxiety and frustration with us, the way these children are taught and are raised to respond to these difficult situations appear to be something they learn from their parents. And what kind of children does this tender society produce? it produces kind children who can live harmoniously in one of the harshest areas of the world, one of the most stressful climates, often with threadbare resources where survival hinges on making the most efficient use of their natural world. In other words, what it's saying is that anger, frustration, and anxiety are learned behaviors. And if you raise your children without those as concepts, and if you are that person that doesn't have anger, frustration, or anxiety, your children don't develop those aspects. And why am I talking about this? We're talking about obesity. I'm going to come to that in a second, but a critical part is this group, despite the hazards of their environment, remain at peace with themselves. And I want you always to remember this, because not only their diet, but also what they're eating, how they raise their kids, how the clan functions, has been critical, I believe, to the long-term survival and the success of hunter-gatherer societies. Let's go to the next slide. So how do human beings work? Well, more and more in our society, human beings' focus is on productivity. In our schools, our coaches, we raise our children to be the best they can be, to be successful, to work really hard, to achieve. And we provide for them all the skills that are required to make money, to be competitive, and to be productive in our society. Just like building a car's engine, the biggest, best, fastest, most powerful engine. But when you look at a car's engine, no matter how powerful it is, in fact, the more powerful it is, the more efficient it is, the more robust, the better the cooling system is, because the byproduct of a car's engine working really hard is heat. And the cooling system has to match that, the power of that car's engine, to reduce and dissipate that heat so that the car stays more functional. Can you imagine having a car's engine without a cooling system? That car's engine is going to overheat and it's going to explode pretty quickly. Throwing a bucket of cold water on the car's engine doesn't really help very much. Now, intuitively, if you look at the car's engine, if you look under your hood, the engine is there, but it's smaller than it could be for the space because it has to make room for the cooling system. And that reduces productivity. And then also the engine has to turn the fan, which requires energy, which doesn't go into power. So therefore, superficially, the cooling system seems to detract from productivity. But without the cooling system, the engine cannot be productive. And it's critically important to remember this analogy when it comes to raising healthy people. Let's go to the next slide. So raising a healthy child, being a healthy person, yes, it requires productivity. On the functional side, on the work side, on the things that we have to do. We strive for success, we're productive, we put in hard work, we achieve things, we set perfection goals, we set expectations of ourselves, we control our environment, we control our wealth, we build power. And the byproduct, the heat from that car's engine, is stress, anxiety, frustration, depression, sadness, anger, boredom, pleasure. Collectively, we call that emotional tension. So a healthy human being has all the skills and the strategies and the education necessary to be highly productive and achieve well. But at the same time, it is our parents' job not to focus on productivity, but to help us, to raise us with effective emotion management tools, emotion management skills, whether they come from the creative arts, whether they are meditative, whether they're spiritual, whether they are physically active, whether there's human connection through empathy and the ability to be vulnerable, sexuality, various substances. All of these things together in diversity are excellent, excellent forms of things that we get to do to dissipate the energy, the tension that builds up from our productive lives. And the more diverse that is, the healthier we are. So it is incumbent upon our parents to help us to develop a diverse emotion management system. Yes, it requires effort, and the effort and the time that it takes to do those things takes away superficially from productivity. But in fact, being able to dissipate our emotions along the way makes us more productive, makes us more able to handle the stresses and the issues of our lives. So why am I talking about this? Well, let's look at what's going wrong more and more and more in our society. Go to the next slide. we are so heavily focused on productivity these days. We're working harder, we're working longer, and particularly for women who have a traditional, historical, ridiculous expectation of running a house, raising children, and now having to be part of the workspace. We men just have to go to work. It's a ludicrous hardship that we've imposed in a very unbalanced way on women. But you can see how everything that we do is focused on success and productivity, and we don't develop the time, the effort, the skills that are there for our emotional tension. And here's a critically important statement. The root cause of normal children developing mental health disease is a comprehensively deficient emotion management system. And when we don't have an effective emotion management system, if we look back at our society over the last 100 or so years, go to the next slide. What we do is we find things that are local in our environment. And over the last 100, 150 years, we've gone through using alcohol as a form of instant gratification. You drink a couple of shots of alcohol, a couple of glasses of wine, it gives you instant euphoria, that tranquility, and it just numbs and soothes and obliterates that emotional tension. Very immediately effective, but on the back end is negativity, harm, guilt, and repression of the very stresses and the issues that we're trying to cool off from that come from productivity. And if you look at our society in this country, we've gone through prohibition with alcohol. And then in the 1950s, as alcohol was diminishing, what we were doing, we were smoking. And we used nicotine, and we continue to use nicotine in various forms, vaping and such, as a dominant, exclusive emotion management system. And obviously, everybody understands the negative byproduct of alcoholism and of smoking. So as we've wrestled with these two over the last 100, 150 years, what has happened? Because we certainly haven't focused on better emotion management skills. So what else has happened? Go to the next slide. Well, let's go through that history. My favorite movie, 1943, Casablanca. If you look at that picture, you got Bogey, you got Ingrid, but everybody is smoking. And there's always, in every scene in Casablanca, somebody's drinking. Smoking, drinking. But look at one other thing. Look at how ridiculously skinny every single one of these people are. In fact, there's only really one heavy person in the entire movie, and that's the owner of the Blue Parrot, the opposing bar. But look at how, if you were to recast this movie now and skinniness was important, you probably wouldn't be able to find a cast. Let's go to the next slide. However, by the 1950s, more and more people were dying of heart disease and strokes. In fact, General Eisenhower had 5 heart attacks in the 50s, eventually died from one. So we knew that alcohol and smoking was a wonderful way to deal with our emotional needs. And in the 1950s, there was no connection of smoking to disease. In fact, ads like "most doctors smoke Camels" were very prevalent at the time. So a gentleman by the name of Ancel Keys, who was a human physiologist, and a few of his colleagues did autopsies on the patients that died of heart attacks and strokes. And what did they find? They found that the blood vessels were being clogged up in the top left corner here. Our blood vessels were being clogged with fat and cholesterol. And when we had a stroke, the blood vessel was clogged again with fat and cholesterol, and that caused the stroke. So they said, aha, it's the fat and the lard and the saturated fat that we're eating in our diet that's clogging our blood vessels and causing all of these heart attacks and strokes. And they sounded the alarm, the societal alarm. Dietary cholesterol, saturated fat is killing us. And you can see Time magazine in the middle there blaming eggs and bacon for our heart attacks and our strokes. And very rapidly as a society, we became lipophobic. Everything went low fat, no fat, and we removed fat from our diet. Now, let me just take you back a second. Remember those Eskimos? And when you look at the blood vessels of those Eskimos, there ain't no lipid disease. There ain't no blood clotting their blood vessels. So a little bit of a dichotomy. If 80 to 90% of their caloric consumption is fat, but they got no lipid disease, maybe that's a problem. But Ancel Keys went and did some studies called the 7-country studies, and they believed that this hypothesis was absolutely true, and they convinced society to become lipophobic. Go to the next slide. So how did we react to that? We started removing all the healthy fat, all the animal fat, all the saturated fat from our diet. Well, food tastes like crap when you take the fat out, so what did we add in? We started adding in what farmers were farming, crops. Fructose corn syrup, sugar, starches, grains, fruits, carbohydrates. And then we manufactured industrial oils, industrial fats. So we went away from butter, we went to margarine. We went away from olive oil and coconut oil and avocado oil, and we went to canola oil and corn oil and vegetable oil. And we introduced all these polyunsaturated fatty acids that are industrial oils into our diet. And by 1977, from 1950 to 1977, we changed pretty darn radically. We went from, in this country, in America, less than 20% of our diet was carbohydrates. Now the recommendations by the food pyramid of 1977 was that 60+% of our diet should be, of our calories, should be carbohydrates. We reduced our saturated fat consumption from 65% typically to below 10%. We reduced salt from our diet. We demonized cholesterol. Portion sizes went up because there was no more limitation on portion sizes by the human body. And what we didn't realize, and here's the single biggest mistake that we have made and we continue to make to this day, is that carbohydrates have exactly the same instant gratifying endorphin effect, feel-good tranquility, relaxation effect that nicotine, alcohol, crystal meth, crack cocaine, heroin, exactly the same part of the brain is lit up when you eat carbohydrates. And now look at our food pyramid. There are 6 categories there, 4 of which are all crystal meth. Sorry, carbohydrates. Same thing. Very, very little real food. And so by the late 1970s, we started the lipophobic carbophilic generation, people that just love their carbohydrates. And by the 1970s, we also realized now that smoking was causing heart attacks and strokes. So smoking rates were declining massively. And what did people who had a vulnerability to addictive behavior do? They quit smoking. And what bad thing often happens to those folks? They gain a ton of weight. So those people didn't really quit smoking. They just went from nicotine to carbohydrates as their primary endorphin, as their primary emotion management system. And what happened is their lung cancer and their emphysema risk went down, but their weight started accumulating, they started getting diabetes, they started getting heart attacks and strokes, no longer from nicotine, but now from sugar and starch. And in fact, just yesterday, a guy by the name of Steve Nissen published an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about the increase of heart attack and stroke rates in non-smokers. Well, guess where it comes from? And this was the start of something called CMOD, the carbohydrate insulin mechanism of obesity and diabetes. And that conflicts completely with lipid heart, which has been the prevailing hypothesis of heart attacks and strokes and obesity for the last 70 years. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here, what the current status is. Our society is still incredibly focused on success, productivity, achievement, wealth, and we raise our children to be that. The problem is more and more parents are not allowing the schools and the coaches to do that. They're participating in productivity skill set development as well. And they're foregoing what parents are supposed to do, which is to teach our children emotion management strategies. So we have fewer and fewer action-based, effort-based emotion management strategies. Now, it's bad to drink alcohol, it's bad to smoke, but what is prevalent? Okay, think about this. If I was sitting in a room and I came in and I lit up a cigarette, nowadays, most people would say, not a good idea, please put it out. Or if I came to a meeting and I put down a bottle of Jack Daniels and poured myself a drink, that is no longer accepted. A few decades ago, that was perfectly accepted. But if I came in and I put on the table a bunch of Starbucks coffee, and Starbucks doesn't sell coffee, by the way, they sell sugar occasionally flavored with coffee. But if I sat down with some Starbucks coffee and I sat down with a box of donuts, everybody would be sharing one. This is the era of carbophilia. And the majority of human beings throughout the world are using carbohydrates and the act of snacking as their primary emotion management lifestyle. And it's beyond just using it, it's something that we create in our society. Restaurants, at home, advertising, marketing, shopping, having that little snack, we surround ourselves with it. And when that relationship starts to cause harm, we ignore the harm. And as you ignore the harm and validate and justify to yourself that because of your emotional tension, you need those carbohydrates. I've had a rough day, therefore I have to have this bowl of ice cream. And I've got some insulin in my insulin pen, and I can always bring my blood sugar down with my insulin, says the diabetic. Well, by that time, you've lost control of the relationship. And no different to a smoker or to an alcoholic. You no longer have control over your relationship with carbohydrates. You have developed a drug addiction. And in fact, if you look at the bottom right, you'll see two brain scans. One person on cocaine, one person on sugar. Looks identical, doesn't it? That's what sugar does in our brain. So what has that resulted in? Because we do not have an effective emotion management system. As we get stressed out, as we get anxious and frustrated and depressed from this focus on productivity, the carbohydrates act like a bucket of cold water just to cool us off for a few seconds. But it's highly erosive to our self-esteem, to our self-confidence, and more we're on psychotropic drugs, antidepressant drugs. There's disruptive behavior. Everybody's getting angry. Suicides are through the roof, including in high school kids, and anybody that has any major traumatic events in their life develop PTSD at the drop of a hat. PTSD is the consequence of an absence of effective emotion management strategies when you're exposed to significant emotional disruption. So more and more we're using carbohydrates as a way to numb, soothe, and obliterate our emotions. And what do those carbohydrates do? They make us fat and diabetic. Let's go to the next slide. And this in 2019, remember Casablanca, 1943, everybody skinny, everybody smoking, everybody drinking. This picture is the standard status quo of 2019. And those would be the actors in Casablanca if it was shot today. Let's go to the next slide. So let's understand this, because what happens is the results of that carbophilia means that most people gain weight. And the world out there said, okay, in order to lose weight, we have to reduce our caloric consumption. And we created this world of what we call CECC, calories in, calories out, eat less, do more. And yes, if you don't eat anything for a period of time, you're going to lose some weight. But it doesn't address our addicted relationship to a drug called carbohydrates. CECC, calories in, calories out, every form of diet and exercise program out there, every form of weight loss, including surgery, is like telling a smoker to smoke less or telling an alcoholic to drink less. Nobody would ever do that. Nobody would ever address an addiction with harm reduction, with doing less. And yet every diet that any of you have ever failed is based on exactly that principle. We go to Weight Watchers and we save up all our points by cutting back our calories, and then we spend our points on a piece of cheesecake. That's a little bit like an alcoholic celebrating a year of sobriety with a case of beer. It's crazy. But that's the current status quo. So let's look at this. Number one, and I'm absolutely 100% certain about this, there is no gene for obesity, and there is no gene for type 2 diabetes. Despite what you may hear, despite what you may read, there is no gene for either disease. No gene causes them. They are exclusively behavioral. Okay? What determines whether you become fat or diabetic is based upon how your body responds to the carbohydrates you eat and drink. But if you do not eat carbohydrates, you cannot be heavy and you cannot develop type 2 diabetes. It is that simple. What determines whether you become heavy or diabetic? It is the human body's ability to produce insulin. So what is genetic is that every human being has either a high or a low capacity to produce insulin. As we eat carbohydrates, as we eat sugar or starch, the sugar and starch gets taken up by the intestine, rapidly goes into the bloodstream, and the pancreas responds by releasing a hormone called insulin. And insulin's job is to get sugar to be removed from the bloodstream into our cells, into the muscle cells, and primarily into the liver cells. And the liver's job is to turn that excess sugar into fat. And that's where our fat comes from. But over time, if you're eating and snacking on carbohydrates multiple times a day, over time, the liver is so overexposed to insulin and sugar that it becomes sluggish. It becomes resistant to small changes in blood sugar and blood insulin. So now, in order to get the liver to do its work, you need to produce more insulin from your pancreas. And then you can force the liver to do more work, and the liver resists it again. So now you're eating more insulin. And eventually, the low producers, very early on in that cycle of insulin resistance, cannot produce more insulin. They lose their ability to produce more insulin. Now, the liver cannot remove that sugar from the bloodstream. The sugar builds up, the blood levels go up very high, and at a certain point of blood sugar elevation, that person is diagnosed with a disease called type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is the consequence of insulin resistance in someone early on who cannot produce a huge amount of insulin. On the flip side of that, if people genetically can produce a massive amount of insulin, then no matter how resistant the liver is, you can still produce more insulin and force the liver to remove sugar from the bloodstream. Yeah, your blood sugar may go up just a little bit, but you're not developing diabetes. But you're able to become enormous. You get really, really fat because the liver is able to convert all the sugar into fat, no matter what you put in your mouth. So the fattest people are less likely to have diabetes, especially if they've only been fat for a while. It's your moderately overweight people who have that blood sugar that goes up very quickly and stays in the blood that develop diabetes. And why is that important in lipedema? Because lipedema patients are typically very high insulin producers. And that's why it's so easy to become fat. Now, the secondary issue is, and we'll explore this in a second in a couple of slides down, is why does that fat in a particular group, particularly of females, get specifically distributed to the buttocks, to the hips, to the thighs, and sometimes to the arms? What mediates that? But something that we're going to look at in a group of patients, hopefully with Catherine and Leslyn, is to look at that blood profile, because you can actually measure insulin production in a blood profile. So we want to confirm that suspicion that it's the high insulin producers that are people that become, or at least have the propensity to develop lipedema. And it's less likely, especially early on, for someone with lipedema to have bad type 2 diabetes. But that needs to be sorted out still. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to skip this slide if it's okay. Let's skip this slide. I've talked about this already. Okay, so the next human concept to understand is that when anything is vitally important to human biology, to human survival, the human body has a very tight feedback mechanism to control access to and a stopping point for that substance, for example. So the way your car works, you've got a brake and a gas pedal. And the two work opposite to each other. One causes the car to go, one causes the car to stop. Without either of those, the car's not working very well. So when it comes to critically important, vitally important aspects, the human body has something called homeostasis, which is that feedback control. So let's take water, for example. Water is vital to life. We need it for hydration. We start to drink water, and we have no idea how much we're going to drink. But as soon as our thirst is quenched, it might be one bottle, it might be 2 bottles, a signal goes from our bodies to our brain that says stop, and we immediately stop drinking water, and there's no incentive to overdrink. So the quantity and the frequency is very tightly controlled by the thirst center, and this is actually mediated through salt. And there really is no incentive to overdrink. Whereas with alcohol, there's no stopping point. Alcohol is not necessary for human survival. we're not drinking alcohol for hydration, we're drinking alcohol for a pleasure. And the more we drink, the more buzzed we get. So there is no stopping point. Okay? We'll come back to that in a second. When it comes to vital nutrients for human survival, and this is a critically important point, both protein and fat are essential for human survival. We cannot make certain types of protein and certain types of fats inside of us, so therefore we have to consume them from typically animal or plant sources. But when it comes to protein and fat consumption, the human body can very, very tightly regulate how much we eat. So if I love my ribeye steaks, let's say I'm really hungry and I'm sitting down and you put a 64-ounce ribeye steak in front of me. I have no idea how much I'm going to eat. I'll start eating, and at a certain point, I will stop because I'm full, and there's no way I'm going to eat more. There's no way I'm going to eat more. But 2 minutes later, what am I eating? Ice cream, chocolates, cheesecake, bag of chips in front of the TV. I'm not sitting there eating more steak because that's food and I'm full and I've had enough. But I certainly can eat carbohydrates after I'm full of steak. So one of the critical things about nutrients that are vital to the human body is they are also tightly controlled in a regulatory feedback fashion by the human body, and it is mediated by a group of hormones called leptinoids. They occur at various stages in our intestine and from our fat cells, and they make you feel queasy, and it's a biochemical stopping point when you eat fat. Well, if fat wasn't necessary, if fat was harmful, the human body wouldn't have that stopping point. Now, on the flip side, when you look at drugs, and I've mentioned this briefly a few seconds ago, when you look at drugs like alcohol or carbohydrates, and I'm calling carbohydrates a drug because neither of those two are necessary for human survival. If you never drank a drop of alcohol again, if you never ate a piece of sugar or starch again, you'd be absolutely fine. Yes, we need sugar in our bloodstream, but the sugar, the liver produces sugar very, very well. And that is where our sugar should come from. But on the other side of that, both alcohol and carbohydrates are very, very neuroactive in terms of activating the endorphin system. So therefore, you develop this positive feedback loop of more makes you feel better, and therefore I need more for my emotional management. And that more is a positive feedback loop for insulin. And eventually, you either gain the weight or become diabetic. Go ahead, slide. So as human beings, what we've done, we're very smart. When it comes to water, you never have to regulate it. When it comes to alcohol, we have a very specific quantifiable amount that each person knows what their limits are. And it's based on ounces of alcohol and numbers of drinks. It's a mathematical formula that we use to regulate alcohol, but we don't need a regulatory system for water because the body does that inherently. Now, can I overdrink water? No. Can I overdrink alcohol? Absolutely. I've done that experiment a few times purely for scientific purposes. But I know, for example, tonight, I can drink 10 bottles of beer. There's no way I can drink 10 bottles of water. In exactly the same way, as we became carbophilic in our society, we know that fat very tightly regulates how much we eat. So we've never ever before in our history as a species had to regulate our portion sizes because it was done automatically by the human body. There was tight feedback from these leptinoid hormones. But now that we've become carbophilic, there is no stopping point. The stopping point for eating chips is the bottom of the bag. The stopping point is when you run out of carbohydrates. So we human beings are very smart, and we created a mathematical formula to quantify how much it may be safe to eat. And it's based on calories. It's a thermodynamic based on the heat that gets produced by calories. And we've used some bizarre mathematical formula to quantify how much every human being should eat each day to break even in terms of weight. And then if you want to gain weight, you want to increase your calories. And if you want to lose weight, you really reduce your calories. But it's still an artificial mathematical formula that was designed to try to regulate a system that the human body has no need to regulate and has no ability to regulate. And we know that if I'm 6 foot tall, if I go out with my wife and she's 5'5", if we order the same thing, they're going to put exactly the same portion in front of us. And if it's predominantly carbohydrates, both of us can finish the same amount. But if that was a steak, I'd be eating a 12 to 18 ounce steak. She'd probably be eating a 4 to 6 ounce steak because her body's telling her different signals to mine. Okay, so the one thing that we absolutely do not need to adhere to, and yet our societies are obsessed about it, is calories. When you eat real food, you can rely on your body to tell you how much you need, and that's very individual. We have to get away from a calorie-based system to a satiety-based system of controlling our appetite. Let's go to the next slide. And in fact, this is a beautiful study that was done by Danziger in 2005, where he looked at 4 different diets of the day: the Atkins diet, which is a low carbohydrate diet; the Ornish diet, a fat restricted diet; Weight Watchers, an energy restriction; the Zone diet, a macronutrient balanced diet. And look at the pathetic results. And this is typical for every diet out there, because diets are unsustainable, and over 98% of diets fail within the first 2 to 3 months. So if you look at the percentage of people who completed this diet, who stuck to the diet by 8 weeks, it's supposed to be a one year study. Only around 50 to 60% of people managed 8 weeks. That's pathetic if this is supposed to be a lifelong situation. And look at the amount of weight that they had managed to keep off by 1 year. 4.8 pounds, 7.3 pounds, 4.9 pounds, 6 pounds. That's not weight loss for an obese person. I know, I've been there. That's a bowel movement, okay? So that is not weight loss, and this is why diets fail. Yes, people can lose an extraordinary amount of weight on diets. I do surgery. My starting point for weight loss when I'm doing obesity surgery is around 80 to 100 pounds. I expect my patients to lose a minimum of 80 to 100 pounds in the first year. And if all those patients did was to lose their weight, if they never addressed their behavior, the majority of them would have gained that weight back and then some within 5 to 7 years of that surgery. And a third of my practice is taking care of people who have had obesity surgery elsewhere who did just that. They're heavier now than they were a few years ago when they had their original surgery. And the problem with that is that most of them are missing large portions of their stomach. So intentional calorie-restricted diets will always fail because ultimately calorie restriction is a form of starvation, and it doesn't make us feel full. Harm reduction diets, or harm reduction as a methodology, does not work in addiction because you still have access to your drug of choice. We have not addressed the lifestyle by which you manage your emotional needs through what you eat and drink. Go ahead with the next slide. Okay, so let's look at the difference between feeling full and satiety. I can put a balloon into somebody's stomach and reduce the size of the stomach, and then they eat a tiny amount of food and they feel full. That is gastric distension that sends a signal to your brain that makes you feel full for a while. And that is the principle we use in obesity surgery. Any obesity surgery transforms the volume you can eat and plays around with gastric distension as a feeling of fullness. But you can eat a steak, you can eat a pile of vegetables, I can put a balloon into your body. Every one of those acts exactly the same in terms of gastric distension. That is not a good way to regulate how much you eat. For a little while, the surgery does work. Absolutely, I do the surgery. But long term, that does not work well, because what overrides gastric distension is frequency and quality. You can snack your way through any surgery I can do. If you're having a little bit here, a little bit there, and by the end of the day, it's a massive amount, you've beaten that system. Carbohydrates, sugar and starch, defy all of the hormonal feedback that give us biochemical satiety, fullness. If you look at this sketch over here, ghrelin is something that stimulates hunger, and carbohydrates stimulate ghrelin, work on the brain, and increase hunger. On the flip side of that, saturated fat, homeostatically, triggers leptin, it triggers peptide YY, GLP-1, cholecystokinin, all the way along the intestine, and suppresses ghrelin. Saturated fat makes us feel full early and keeps us full for a very long time. But in the last 70 years, we've developed lipophobia to that very system. Let's go to the next slide. So let's look at what happens to people with lipedema and people with obesity. When we follow the healthy food pyramid from 1977 that is so carbohydrate dominant, and right now most Americans are consuming around 80% of their total calories as sugar and starch. And remember, it doesn't matter. This is such an important point. It doesn't matter how the sugar goes into your mouth. The whole world out there will tell you the apple is healthier than the bowl of ice cream. I will tell you that the apple contains twice as much sugar as that bowl of ice cream, and they're equally evil. If you're an alcoholic, a glass of whiskey and a glass of red wine are both on the no list, even though the glass of red wine may be healthy for non-alcoholic people. So it's a critical change in thinking. When Catherine said at the beginning of this whole series, of this talk, that the most difficult part for her was giving up fruit, that's why. Fruit is jam-packed with sugar, and it doesn't matter how you camouflage the sugar in a nice green skin and call it an apple or as a bowl of ice cream. It is the same substance that enters your bloodstream. And when that sugar enters your bloodstream, your blood sugar goes up, your insulin level goes up, insulin causes that blood sugar to go down, and when your blood sugar goes down, you're hungry. And you get hungry throughout the day, and guess what you're doing? You're intermittently eating. Little bite here, little snack there, and you're increasing your appetite and increasing your food consumption to 6 to 8 small meals a day. And you are continuously replenishing the amount of sugar that the liver stores, and the liver just can't keep up. So the liver is turning all the sugar to fat, and you develop a fatty liver, and then the liver transports that fat to the fat cells, and the fat cells are continuously taking up that fat. The other critical thing to know about insulin, and this is very important, particularly as we resolve lipedema, is that insulin blocks an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, and LPL, lipoprotein lipase, is the enzyme that breaks down fat for release from the fat cells. So what insulin does, it essentially blocks your ability to release fat from your fat cells. So all you can do is accumulate fat. And you can't use that fat because it's blocked by insulin. So the critical hormone to think about is insulin and what sugar and starch does to insulin. Now, what happens over time, remember what I said, is the liver becomes resistant to insulin. So let's look at the bottom of the slide. Over time, your carbohydrate consumption is going up and down all the time, but insulin, the glucose consumption is going up and up and up because you're looking to get high as the addiction develops. And what happens now is that your insulin reaches a peak. And when that insulin reaches a peak, you can no longer produce that. When that red line is very low, those people get diabetes. But if you take that red line and you elevate it really high, your insulin can still deal with this excess sugar. So your blood glucose stays relatively low. You're able to turn all those glucose to fat. Not only that, because insulin can now no longer regulate the liver from producing sugar, you get something called paradoxical gluconeogenesis, which is the production of sugar not only from your mouth, but also from your liver. And that fat accumulates, if you are genetically predisposed, and I'm going to give you some theories on that, accumulates in your genetically predisposed areas. In men, it's very often around the gut, around the organs in the gut. In women, particular subset of women, it occurs in the buttocks and the lower legs. Some women accumulate fat globally. That is where that genetically predisposed collection occurs. But I do have some insights. Look at that line below that. Cholesterol to steroid hormones are blocked. And I believe that line is more likely than any other, and we're going to explore that in a second, to result in the lipedema distribution of fat. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. As we mentioned before, in lipedema patients, your C-peptide and your insulin levels can rise very high. Excuse me for 1 second. So C-peptide and insulin levels can rise very high. And I just saw a question flash across my screen. Absolutely, get your family doctor, get your GP to measure not only your glucose indices, but get them to measure your C-peptide and insulin. Because my prediction is that they will be very high. So the theory, and please understand, none of this is absolutely proven. This is information we need to consolidate and gather, and we want to test this. And that's why this forum of people is so valuable, because you're very involved and you're going to get yourself tested. In lipedema patients, the prediction is that C-peptide and insulin levels rise extremely high when you are chronically exposed to carbohydrate consumption. And it doesn't matter if it's sugar or starch. And that insulin resistance gets overwhelmed all the time by the human body's production of insulin. So your insulin levels are always elevated. Why is that important? And here's what even most doctors don't understand. There are 6 major classes of steroid hormones. In women, it's the progesterones, the estrogens. In men, it's the testosterones, vitamin D, the cortisols, human growth hormone, the mineralocorticoids, human growth hormone, and the thyroid hormones. All of those hormones start out as a cholesterol precursor. So cholesterol is not the dangerous thing that everybody tells us it is, clogging up our blood vessels. Cholesterol is a vitally important component of human biology. And what happens is you start with cholesterol, and then there are enzymes that transform cholesterol into these various end hormones. So in a healthy person, cholesterol goes through a series of pathways and becomes estrogen. In a healthy man, it does the same thing and becomes testosterone. It also becomes cholecalciferol, so your vitamin D levels are elevated. It becomes cortisol. It becomes human growth hormone, which is not only important to grow, but also to repair tissues and for normal healthy function. It becomes thyroid hormone. So what happens is this: insulin blocks the very first enzyme that converts cholesterol to all those other hormones. Insulin blocks the production of all of those other hormones. Why is that important? It is very common in women that are high insulin producers to have a disease called polycystic ovarian syndrome when they're fertile. Very common. And again, I'm not certain of the volume of patients with lipedema who also have PCOS or fertility issues or androgen issues, but I believe it's fairly common. We also have low vitamin D. We have low thyroid hormones. We have the low ability to produce cortisol. We have a higher testosterone and a higher progesterone level. And that is that high insulin effect. I work with a number of women that have PCOS that are struggling to get pregnant. And as soon as they come off carbohydrates, within 3 months, their fertility goes through the roof. And a lot of those women don't even need to go through IVF programming in order to get pregnant. So I don't know. I have not studied this enough in terms of in the population that we're talking to right now, the lipedema population, but I believe that we're going to find that this is probably one of the reasons why women typically, they have a genetic predisposition, but then in their 30s, 40s, and probably the 40s and 50s, that's when you start getting into stages 2, 3, 4 of lipedema. But it doesn't occur, the picture may be there in younger teenagers and young adults, but it really starts becoming prevalent later on in life because of this insulin resistance. That is my theory. That still needs to be proven. But enzyme blocks that first step, insulin blocks that first enzymatic step where pregnenolone gets converted. That is your precursor to all the hormones. And this high insulin causes fat accumulation, fatty liver, low vitamin D cholecalciferol, low estrogen, high testosterone in women, high cholesterol, and low testosterone in men. High levels of DHE in men cause testosterone, progesterone, and may genetically predetermine deposition of fat in the lipidemic distribution. I don't know this for a fact, but I strongly suspect this to be true. Catherine, can we get the next slide? So what happens when you stop eating carbohydrates? And some people call it the keto diet, some people call it the low carbohydrate diet, but what happens when you stop eating carbohydrates and you start increasing your fat consumption? What happens in Eskimo people traditionally? Well, what happens is the human body is actually designed to be in a state called ketosis. Ketosis just means we're burning fat as a fuel source, not sugar. If you think of your car can burn diesel or it can burn gasoline. and it's just a switch off. So ketosis, ketones are the energy parts of fat, beta hydroxybutyrate or ketones. This is like a diesel car. And when you're burning fat, whether you're eating the fat or the fat is coming from your fat cells, your liver will produce enough sugar to maintain your sugar at low levels where you do not need insulin. Look how low and flat the red line is. The black line is low normal, and the yellow line is high because we're using fat as our fuel source. Perfectly healthy. LeBron James plays pretty high in basketball in ketosis. This is his diet. So the other key thing is it suppresses our hunger. So we're eating fewer calories. And then we do eat a meal, a high-fat, low-carbohydrate meal like Catherine showed in the beginning of the talk. We produce a little bit of sugar during that meal, slight rise in our insulin, not a spike, a rise, and very rapidly that comes back down to normal. That is healthy eating. And this is an insulin-sensitive person. So under insulin sensitivity, your insulin levels remain very low. Your fat is being transported to your fat cells and producing the leptinoids that stop you from eating because you feel full. But the paradox is that even while you're eating, if you're overweight, your fat cells can still release fat because insulin is no longer blocking the release of fat from your fat cells. So you produce these ketones, and the leptinoids that come out with that fat give you that early satiety, which is a form of caloric reduction, and yet you're full. You don't feel starved. And if you are eating a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet, you're not eating very often, and the sexy word for that now is called intermittent fasting. We don't have a problem called intermittent fasting. We had a problem called intermittent eating in the carbohydrate era. I eat once or twice a day, and the reason I do that is because I'm not hungry. And that's the beauty about being in ketosis. You're not just not hungry because of this prolonged satiety, and therefore it becomes easy to eat once or twice a day. Well, what happens between those times? Your body is using your own fat cells or your own fat as a fuel source. And guess what you're doing? You're losing weight. How do you accelerate this process? With frequent little bits of physical activity. Little bits of physical activity, a little walk here, making your bed, walking a little further to your car, not exercise, not exercise. Because what you're doing is you're triggering the liver to release its sugar so that it has a demand for fat. That's a whole different biochemistry, but frequent little bits of physical activity accelerate the weight loss. Not burning up the calories, but accelerating the release of fat. And LCHF, therefore, is likely the most effective treatment for lipidemia, and certainly is better than any medications, any surgery, any liposuction. Let's go to the next slide. This is a patient of mine. And as soon as Catherine mentioned, we started talking about lipedema, it just, boom, it triggered to me that this was her blood work, and I pulled it up. And this is somebody who didn't really eat a lot of fat during this time, but she completely cut out her carbohydrates. So let's just look at her blood work. And she has had classic stage 3, stage 4 lipedema when I first met her. Okay. Now she's a surgical patient, but this was before surgery. And if you look, she had fatty liver. Her liver numbers were slightly off. She also had ridiculously high cholesterols. And that's what happens because we're pouring all this fat into our bloodstream. Her cholesterols were high, but her triglycerides were very high when she was converting sugar to fat. That's how sugar that becomes fat gets transported in the bloodstream, triglycerides. So if you are a carbohydrate consuming lipidemic patient, ask your doctor to check your lipid profile, and my prediction is your triglycerides are going to be through the roof, and that is the number that is most closely associated with heart attacks and strokes. Now, during this time, she was actually on a statin, a drug that's designed to lower your blood fat, and yet despite that, her LDL was still very, very high. 3 months later, from June to September, look at her numbers. This is just completely cutting out sugar, not even eating a high-fat diet, just eating no carbohydrates. By the way, also, look how low her vitamin D was. And this is one patient, but I've got literally hundreds that are identical to this in my lipedema population. So look at her cholesterol, gone from 290, I believe that is, to 145. Triglycerides from 250 to 103. HDL didn't move very much. That'll go up over time. And then her LDL, now this is after she stopped Lipitor. She stopped statins when I first met her because I don't like statins. They cause problems and they don't help with heart attacks and strokes. A baby aspirin is far better than an aspirin. Be that as it may, look how LDL dropped from 185 to 70. And this was just cutting out carbohydrates. Look also at her vitamin D. 3 months. She doesn't take vitamin D. Went from 16 to 34. And that is because she became insulin sensitive. And what did her doctor tell her? Oh, it's dangerous to stop your statin. Didn't ignore the numbers, because if she first saw this patient, she wouldn't put her on a statin. So that's the effect of cutting carbohydrates completely out of your diet. Go ahead. Slide. Okay, so one of the changes in thinking, because this requires a great degree of long-term austerity to treat the disease of lipedema effectively. You can treat the obesity more easily. The most resistant is the lipedema. Think about that camel in the desert. To change our minds that obesity is really, and the accumulation of fat, is not a weight problem, it's not a calorie problem, it's not an overeating problem. It is a transformation of how we manage our emotional needs. That obesity is primarily chronic use of an endorphin-releasing, highly neuroactive substance to the point of harm, and ignoring and distorting the reality of that harm to continue the relationship. When an alcoholic says, I need a drink, it's not because they're thirsty. And when a fat person says, I'm hungry, it is not because we need food. It's because our brain needs to get high. And diets, even a ketogenic diet, a low-carb diet, just modifies weight. Only treating your relationship with carbohydrates as an addiction through removal and replacement, through cognitive behavioral therapy, through changing how you manage your emotional needs, only then will you do enough and sustain enough to get rid not only of your excess weight in terms of the obesity, but also the specific lipidemic deposits. Go ahead and slide, please. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we change? And this is basically my starter program. The goal is NCHFIFEM. I'll explain that as we go. Much, much more than just a ketogenic diet. And we go through stages of change. You cannot eat an elephant in one bite. We have to cut it up into little pieces, and if we make tiny little changes progressively, we eventually get there. Before you do anything, anybody listening to this talk, before you change anything, have awareness. The first awareness is simple. Number one, don't eat or drink anything unless you absolutely know what the total carbohydrate consumption is. Irrespective if the world out there tells you it's natural sugar or it's healthy sugar, just know what the total carbohydrate consumption is, because that is the enemy. The second thing is, look at how often you put any form of calories in your mouth. And my prediction is, when you create an awareness of it, it's probably going to be very similar to the number of times the average smoker smokes. Probably around 12 to 15 times a day. And you may be sitting there saying, oh, no, I don't. I'll just give you a simple little anecdote about this. I was flying to Seattle a few weeks ago to give a talk. And I was sitting on the plane next to an enormous gentleman. And we started talking about obesity. And along the flight attendant comes along, and she's got the little basket of crystal meth, crack cocaine, nicotine, and heroin. And he looks over and he grabs a bag of cookies and he eats the cookies. I'm having black coffee. And about every 20 to 30 minutes, she comes along and she's got the basket again and she gives him the cookies. I fill up my black coffee. At the end of the flight, we're getting off the plane after 4.5 hours, and I turned to him and I said, by the way, how many bags of cookies did you have? And he said, oh, no, I just had one. I counted. He had 7. So the question is, was he lying to me? And the answer is no, he wasn't. No, he was not. Because we have a subconscious fabric to our lives where we take care of our emotional needs throughout the day. And we're not aware of, we do that so opportunistically that we're unaware of how often we access our drug of choice. So when you're looking at number 2, please make sure, don't answer that question right now, because you're going to be like him. You're going to underestimate how often you do something. make sure that over the next 2 or 3 days, you raise this to conscious awareness. That's how we break habits. We have to recognize that we're actually doing it. So don't argue with me right now. You may argue with me in three days' time, that's fine. But right now, we raise up into conscious awareness how often we actually put anything in our mouth. And my prediction, it's going to be 12 to 15 times at minimum. And then the next question you want to ask yourself is, why? Why am I eating this right now? I've just had dinner. Why am I eating the ice cream? I'm on the way home to dinner. Why am I stopping at McDonald's for the McFlurry? Those are all personal stories, by the way. I had a very intimate relationship with M&M McFlurries for a long time. Ask yourself why. And almost always, your snacking and your eating is predicated by your emotional needs. Get your blood work done, but direct to your family doctor that you want the full spectrum of sugar blood work and fat blood work and some of those vitamins, especially the D vitamins. And if you're willing to make these changes, ask if your family doctor can put you on a medication called metformin, even if you are not diabetic. It's a diabetic medication, but really what metformin does is it increases insulin sensitivity, which is the first stage of this. And if you've got high estrogen, if you're still in that premenopausal era, if you've got high estrogen, maybe a cyclical birth control pill may be a value. It still needs a trial, may be a value for a while as you become insulin sensitive. Certainly something we use for our polycystic ovarian syndrome patients who are also very high insulin producers. Slide, please. Okay. So I said eating the elephant. And the key thing here is if you make little changes, it's sustainable, and also you don't experience the misery of the so-called keto flu. So we remove carbohydrates from our environment in 4 different stages. The first one, which is actually for a lot of people the easiest thing to do, is to remove all calories. I don't use the word calories very often, but do not drink anything with calories in it. I don't care if it's orange juice or apple juice or cranberry juice or Coke or Mountain Dew. Get rid of it. If it contains calories, do not drink it. But very importantly, bring at least 6 to 8 replacements into your environment. And they don't have to be perfect. I've got water, I've got Crystal Light, I've got 3 flavors of Fresca, I've got coffee, I've got green tea, I've got regular tea. I've got a variety of different things in my fridge right now. So when I get there and I want something to drink, I'm not upset that there's no Coke or no orange juice. I've got 8 different things I can choose from. Black coffee being the thing that I train myself to do. But the key thing here is never drink your calories. Drink for hydration, eat for eat for your caloric requirements. The next aspect, and I told this story about the big guy on the plane with me for a specific reason. One of the things most people don't understand is that the human brain can focus intensely for around 20 minutes at a time. And I know this long talk is defying what I'm just saying here, but the human brain can focus, right there, I took a little break. The human brain can focus intensely for about 20 minutes at any one time. And then it has to have a break. The endorphin system is designed to give us that break. I call it a mind cleansing moment. It can be a few seconds, like a joke or like a sip on something, or it can take a minute or two like going outside for a cigarette. But every human being can primarily be defined by what we do for that ritualistic break. The smoker smoking, the religious person saying a prayer, the chatty person's having a conversation, and the fat person's having a snack. And for me, that was Coke and M&Ms when I was heavy. Now, it's black coffee. And I don't drink black coffee, I sip it. I chose black coffee knowing that that was what I wanted to do long term. I'm not telling you have to drink black coffee, but find something that doesn't contain calories, ritualize your relationship. I have a whole ritual by which I make my coffee in the morning. I've got my Yeti cups that I drink with. I'm continuously thinking about and focusing on that as my mind cleansing moment. And what's gone are the M&Ms and the Coke. So ritualize that mind cleansing moment. Alcohol is permitted, but have tight boundaries around alcohol. Certainly don't use any sugary mixes. When we do margaritas, we make lemonade out of Crystal Light. And in the beginning, even get rid of soups and protein shakes and all the liquid calories that you drink. I know that soups down the road may be okay, but right now, get rid of drinking or any calories. And then just because we're being totally defiant, but biologically critically necessary, add salt to your food. Salt, 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 salt. Salt is critically important. Oh, but my blood pressure, The human species has used salt as a way to manage our blood pressure and our blood volume for over 100,000 years. It is only in the modern era, in the carbohydrate era, that salt has been called bad. Salt is critically important. And in fact, salt will spare your magnesium, your potassium, and your calcium, because the human body uses salt to pee, to poop, and to sweat. Yes, I said poop. Salt is probably the single most important aspect of avoiding constipation in human beings. We've oversold fiber, but that's for another day, okay? Lions and dogs who eat only meat do not get constipated. Another little soapbox for me. Go ahead with the next slide. So once you've removed the sugar and starch from the drinks, let's now move to food. And the first thing, and this is a tough thing to do, but a meal is exclusively sitting at a table with a plate of food and a knife and fork. Now, your first thing is, oh, I'm too busy, I don't have time. Isn't that the whole point? Why the devil, number one, are you so busy that you don't have time to have a meal if it's something that provides for you nutrition and helps you to cool off? Think about how our productivity affects our relaxation and how ready you are to slice away a critically vital piece of your life because it takes away from productivity. I'm too busy, I'm too far behind, I've got to work. No, you don't. Carve out time at least twice a day to sit down at a table with a plate of food and a knife and fork. Healthy people do that. Now, outside of meals, try to create a situation where you never consume calories outside of those two meals. You can drink your fluids at any one time, at any time you want to. The next thing I'd like you to do is cut out the pastas, the starches, all the carbohydrates out of that plate. If you can make that plate as clean from carbohydrates as you possibly can, no rice, no potatoes, no grains, you're going to be in great shape. Down the road, I don't mind some of the other starchy vegetables that are not rice or potatoes. But particularly for my PCOS and my lipedema patients, I'm going to create a slightly bigger degree of austerity here. And I'm going to ask you this question. I want you to ask this question of yourself. If you, and I'm not going to ask you to do this, but just theoretically, if for the rest of your life, you could only do one of two things, you could only be a pure vegetarian, or you could only be a pure carnivore, which would you choose? And I don't mind which of those you choose, but make that decision for yourself. The easier one is the pure carnivore. I'm going to discuss both. But if you can, from time to time, but particularly getting into this, turn yourself into a pure carnivore for between 5 and 7 days or 5 to 14 days. I've actually just come off a 14-day pure carnivore period. Here's what it does. Number one, there are no carbohydrates in any animal products. So it makes thinking about carbohydrates very easy. If you're eating animal products, and that includes cheese and eggs, and any kind of poultry, any kind of beef, pork, lamb, goat, any kind of fish, any kind of seafood, any animal, if that's what you're eating, there are no carbohydrates in that food. A little bit maybe in the cheese, but other than that, pretty close to zero carbohydrates. So you immediately get into ketosis. The beauty about the carnivore diet is it plunges you back into ketosis. And let's face it, you do this long enough, you're going to screw up. Why did I come back off, put myself on a 2-week carnivore correction? Because I screwed up. I made a mistake. Okay, I made a mistake in Seattle. I ate some M&Ms. It happens, but you correct it right away. So I got myself back on track with a carnivore diet. After 2 weeks, I started introducing vegetables again. But it's a very, very useful way to plunge yourself into ketosis, and then over time, your body will fat adapt. The other way that I use a carnivore diet is if I'm vulnerable. On Sunday, my kids took me to a big brunch. It was a buffet, and I was vulnerable to the artistic desserts that were there. So I went into that meal and just said, that's it. I'm just going to, this is going to be a carnivore meal. And I went straight to the carving station. I ate my meat. I loved it. I added butter to my meal. I added some cheese to it. I was perfectly fine. And I could avoid all the temptations. If that's you and you don't mind being a carnivore, that's one strategy. Now let's look at the vegetarian side. I have no problem with people being on a vegetarian diet. If it's for religious purposes, we respect that even tighter. If it's for ethical purposes, okay. I'll work with you in that regard, because the critical thing on a vegetarian diet is this. There are two vegetarian diets. There's a grain-based vegetarian diet and there's a leafy-based vegetarian diet. The grain-based vegetarian diet is a carbohydrate-dominant diet, and that is absolutely on the no list if you're going to do this. If you're going to be a vegetarian, make sure that you're eating the leafy, green, and colored parts of vegetables. Stay away from the starchy vegetables and all the grains. I don't care if it's quinoa or corn or bread, pasta, tortillas. Stay away from it. It doesn't exist in your environment. There are carrots, peas, corn, squashes. At first, for the first 2 weeks, just like on the carnivore diet, stick only to the leafy green vegetables. You're going to lose more weight because there's fewer calories to it. It's going to be more difficult to get into deep ketosis. But remember, the human body processes food with enzymes in the intestine. Vegetarian animals, cows, gorillas, ferment their food. And it's fermentation with bacteria that allow them to extract the energy from vegetables. So basically on the leafy vegetarian diet, the calories you're eating, you poop out. You'll retain a little bit of protein, but the majority of the carbohydrate calories in vegetables are in cellulose, and you poop that out, so it's not bad to do. The problem with that vegetarian diet is fat. So the one thing I'm going to ask you to do is to add nuts and seeds, not peanuts, but any other nuts and seeds to that diet. Add olive oil, coconut oil, and avocado oil liberally to your vegetables. And then also, if you possibly can, maybe a little bit of butter. Those are excellent sources of fat, and for a while, you can subsist on that. We're going to have issues down the road with protein and adequate fat, but we'll discuss that in a little bit. But you can either go the pure leafy green vegetarian diet or the pure carnivore diet and launch yourself into this process. It becomes a very easy way to go. And if you do this effectively, you're not going to have that keto flu. Okay? Now, we can begin, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, but when you start eating these meals, we also introduce something called intermittent fasting, which I hate the terminology, but it's just eating less often. Next slide, please. The third part for me was the most difficult, and that was eliminating snacks. Here's what you cannot do. You cannot have ice cream in the fridge and say you're not going to eat it. You will. This is removal from your environment as best you can of, oh, but my husband likes it. Negotiate. Talk with them. There are places where you're going to encounter snacks, but have a plan of action, and certainly do not put yourself in a vulnerable position. Remember this, a snack is always an emotional event. It is never a nutritional event. So there's two ways to get rid of the snacks. The first one is to go cold turkey, hit your coffee, and use your coffee as your bridge instead of a snack. The second one is to progressively do this, and that is to go from carbohydrate snacks to maybe cheese and pepperoni, and then eventually off all the calories. But remember, everything that requires removal requires replacement. So the other concept, if a snack is always an emotional event, what about bringing a few things into your life that you love to do? Maybe instead of dessert, playing a game of cards with a family member. My wife and I play cribbage on a regular basis right after dinner when she's home. Taking the dog for a little walk, making your bed. There are 1,000 different things that you can do as what I call an action snack. Remember, it's an emotional release. You could sing a song, ask Siri or one of those new electronic machines to play you some music and sing or dance to it. There are so many different things that you can do. Stage 4. And actually, stage 4 wasn't that difficult for me. I thought it would be more difficult. Eliminate fruit. I don't care what the fruit type is. The only permitted ones are avocados, tomatoes, and olives. But in the ketogenic diet, they say, oh, berries are fine. The problem with berries, while on a pure caloric basis, they don't contain a lot of carbohydrates, guess what we fat people do to berries? We do drive-bys. They're in the fridge, and every one of us will go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until they're gone. So 1 or 2 berries, no problem. But by the end of the night, it's like cigarettes. 1 or 2 here, 1 or 2 there, the whole pack is gone. And I've tried and tried and tried, and it just doesn't work. And my patients that struggle are the ones that still give themselves allowances here and there. So when you're starting this, even if it says, oh, this is almond flour, it's an almond flour cake. Cake is cake. And what we're trying to do here is to break relationships, not just cut back on calories. So I differ from some of the keto diets in that aspect because we're dealing with the addiction. And the addiction is to cake, irrespective of how it's made. And I can tell you this from personal experience. I've tried on several occasions to eat unsweet baker's chocolate when I was stressed. Slide, please. So the next set of stages of change, and really what we're looking for now is we're looking for satiety. The first thing is the NCHF. You've heard of LCHF, low carb, high fat. There is no such thing as treating an alcoholic with low consumption of alcohol or treating a smoker with less cigarettes. Nobody's just allowed to use heroin on Tuesdays. So please try to get as close to 0 total carbohydrates as you possibly can. Yes, there's some incidentals. You eat a little bit of corn, you eat some salad. There are incidentals in there. If I'm putting some cream in my coffee, there is some incidentals in there. I don't put cream in my coffee very often. The incidentals are fine, but you want to keep your incidentals to below 30 grams per day, but this is not an allowance. Don't tell yourself, I've eaten 5 grams of carbohydrates the whole day. I can eat this little bit of chocolate to make it up to 30. That's not the way that this works. This is not Weight Watchers. There is no allowance for carbohydrates. The next point in terms of satiety and getting into ketosis is select food based on its fat content. Fat fortify your food. We are obsessed with protein. Protein, for the most part, is irrelevant because it always comes along for the ride. You're eating a piece of steak, you're eating a piece of bacon, you're eating a piece of fish, you're eating a piece of chicken with a skin on. The protein always comes along. Even when you're eating vegetables, the protein is always there. It's the fat that's missing. So for everything I eat, try to add fat. Your olive oil, your coconut oil, your mayo, your avocado oil, your butter, your cheese, your eggs, your avocado. Those are all great ways to fortify either vegetarian or carnivorous meals with increased fat consumption. Why is that fat important? Because as soon as that fat gets into your bloodstream, it gets taken up by the fat cells and it releases leptin that says I'm full. So how do you leverage that? Let's go to the next slide. We leverage that by eating sequentially. We are all geared to eat portions. And we put a piece of food that we think we need to eat in front of us, and for the most part, we can override any early signals and finish what's in front of us, and we're overeating. If you take the amount of food that your brain says you think you need and put it in front of you, you put it in front of you in the middle of the table and have an empty plate right in front of you. You cut up a tiny piece and you put that on your plate. You add your butter, you add your olive oil to that, whether it's a salad, whether it's a little piece of hamburger, and you eat that. You can go back and forth as much as you want to. Seconds, thirds, fourths, I don't care. But every time you go back, what you're doing is asking your stomach how it feels, not your brain how it feels. And pretty quickly, especially if you're fat fortifying, within 5 to 10 minutes, that leptin is working, and you're going to start to feel biochemically full. It's kind of a queasy feeling. You know what it's like when you've eaten too much fat. And you say, okay, you know what, I'm starting to feel full. I'm not sure if I'm going to be full, but let me stop here. Let me go wash my hands if I'm in a restaurant. Let me go and put the dishes in the sink, 2 minutes, and come back. And I bet you're going to be full to the point you can put the food that's in the middle of the table into the fridge. And that is portion control, caloric reduction, but feeling full, not deprived. Also, make sure that you add salt as best you can to all the food that you're eating. That's eating sequentially, and it is the best way to reduce your caloric consumption. Slide. The next aspect of satiety is very popular these days. It's called intermittent fasting. What intermittent fasting means, it just means not eating. Human beings are designed to eat once or twice a day, particularly when we are eating more on the carnivorous side. That's the first thing. And when you're in ketosis, it becomes very easy because you're not hungry. The second comment is this: breakfast is the least important meal of the day. We all wake up in ketosis, and in fact, the dawn effect that diabetics experience is the liver putting sugar into the bloodstream to accommodate, to break that ketosis, or to give you a little burst of sugar because you're in such deep ketosis. So you should not be very hungry. Once you're in ketosis, you should not be very hungry in the morning. And the goal is to ride that wave of ketosis as deep into the day as you can. Have your coffee or your bridge substance there to take care of the mind cleansing moments. And the goal is to eat your 2 meals within a 6 to 8 hour block, or possibly even eventually eating 1 meal. They call that an 18-6 or a 16-8, which means that you're not eating for 18 hours and you're doing your eating in a 6 hour block. Now, it doesn't mean you're eating for 6 hours. You've got 2 meals, you're eating for about 10 to 20 minutes per meal within that 6 hour time. So it might be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and 6 o'clock in the evening, or 7 o'clock in the evening. That's your block. And the goal there is the longer you can go without caloric consumption, the more your body has to rely on your own fat stores, and the quicker you become insulin sensitive. And remember, particularly, not only treating obesity, this works well for obesity, it works well for diabetes, but in particular, for the particular problem of lipedema, this is what's required. This is what's required to access that fat in those particular places of deposition. And in fact, there's a guy that I would urge all of you to look at, a friend of mine by the name of Jason Fung. He's up in Canada. He's the big intermittent fasting guy. He and Megan Ramos are the two people that promote this. It may, if you're comfortable doing it, even be of value to cycle through from time to time 3 to 5 day fasts. I know that sounds, oh my God, I can't do that. But you go to Jason's work and you read his work and you look at his podcasts. For most of us, it is doable. And I believe if the lipedema bothers you that much, a 3 to 5 day period of time, not immediately, but over time, as you get into deeper ketosis, may be of tremendous value to accessing that stubborn fat on your hips and thighs that your body is extremely reluctant to give up. That's a little bit like the camel crossing the desert without eating for several days and using that hump. That's the principle that we're looking for there. Go ahead, slide. So if you're going to remove the carbohydrates, it is critically important that you replace the beneficial role that they had in your life with developing a more effective emotion management system. And an effective emotion management system requires things that take effort, and the effort itself should dissipate the emotion. When I come home and I've had a rough day and I leash up my dog, just that walk relaxes me. But the period of time that I'm walking, the time component of any effective emotion management system allows your brain in that relaxed state to enter a meditative space so that the issues of the day can show themselves, they can reveal themselves, and you're able to connect with and process those issues. And if you're able to have these periods of time throughout your life, throughout your day, where you can predict this thing, this interaction is going to cause me anxiety and stress. I call that my anxiety tornado. I can tell when that tornado is happening. Way back when I was heavy and I wasn't in tune with this, I'd look back behind me and I'd see the destruction that my anxiety did to the people around me and to myself with my carbohydrates. Now I can look at situations that I know are going to be stressful, that I know are going to promote my anxiety. And I can say, okay, I see you, tornado. I see you, dark cloud. I'm going to go and hide in a walk. I'm going to go and hide in singing. I'm going to go and hide in a moment of time with a higher power. More and more, as you connect with your emotions, you're able to walk them back. You're able to predict situations and things that are going to cause you to react. When some idiot driver cuts you off on the road, when you take a wrong turn in the car, when you get that email or that text from somebody that you know is going to aggravate you, when something unexpected is about to happen, sometimes you fall into the middle of it, but if you can predict that, and I name those feelings. I've got my anxiety tornado. Sometimes people say something that just wounds me. I feel hurt. Sometimes I'm depressed and I feel like I'm in a hole. Sometimes I'm buoyant and I'm bouncy. Sometimes I just want to curl up. And sometimes I have to procrastinate. Procrastination is always a response to an intense emotion event. Sometimes I just have to go a little OCD and clean. Connect to your feelings and figure out ways to dissipate them and connect to the driving issues. Preempt those. Do things that give you pride routinely. I walk my dog twice a day. I make my bed every morning. Even in a darn hotel, I pull the covers up. It's never perfect, but it's a moment to feel some pride. I can feel pride. I can plan my day. I can prepare for those emotions and give myself emotional buoyancy, money in the bank, so that when I hit those trouble spots, I don't go back to the fridge and the pantry. I tap into what I have built up to do. I've got my coffee. I've got my mind cleansing moments. I look for those action snacks, parking my car a little further away, taking the stairs instead of the escalator. Those are all little tricks that you can do to build an emotion management system. If any of you have fibromyalgia is a disease of immobility. It means that your tendons and the fibers around your joints in your muscles are not being moved. Little bits of movement often are far better than Lyrica or any other medication to help you with your fibromyalgia. Help yourself. Same thing here with the lipedema. Take time, take the risk of going for that walk. Develop that emotional resilience. And finally, always try to turn things to the positive. We are so negative with so many things. Put a positive twist on things like the Eskimos do. Develop empathy, develop gratitude, develop kindness. Let go of revenge, let go of anxiety, let go of stress. And the most important thing we have to let go of is perfectionism. Next slide. So long-term remission, not only from obesity, but I believe from lipedema itself, requires a low carbohydrate, high fat, intermittent fasting, emotion management lifestyle. It doesn't happen in an instant. It takes time. It takes time. Eat the elephant. Develop a new diverse set of endorphin activating skills. I love this group because this is really support. It's AA. And if you can support each other, that is the single best way to go forward. And Catherine has done an extraordinary job of gathering people, like-minded people together with the same condition that, okay, this is what I've got. Here's how I'm going to deal with it. And we all need friends. We need empathy. We need an environment where we can be vulnerable. And that, I believe, is what this group means, which I wish so many other groups of people could be as tightly knit as this, all over the world. Along the way, you may look at certain things. You may require compression garments. You may even look at surgery. But ultimately, your best weapon is to develop arrogant integrity. Do not be ashamed of how you look. This is who I am. I am who I am. I'm proud of it because I'm working at it. No vegetarian feels deprived of the fact they can't eat meat. That's disgusting. How the hell can you eat Bambi? That's arrogant integrity, okay? They're not deprived. They have arrogant integrity. If you can develop arrogant integrity to the carbohydrates you used to love so much, if you can develop arrogant integrity to the shame you always felt about your body, you are going to not only survive, but thrive in this environment. And that's what we're looking for. Next slide, please. Please, I'm not going to go through these in detail. This is a woman by the name of Brene Brown who has a great set of things that we can develop over time to help with our emotion management. But one of the most important ones, if I can leave one with you, and that is to let go when you're doing things for pleasure and fun. Let go of perfectionism. Keep perfectionism for the work that you do, but not for the fun that you have. Develop self-compassion. Be satisfied with a short walk. Don't be upset that it wasn't long enough or far enough. Be satisfied with the fact that you sang. Don't be upset that it wasn't in key or on tune, because I sure can't do that. Have self-compassion, generate that resilient spirit. Go through the rest of these. And that's going to ride you through the waves of missing carbohydrates as the drug that you're dependent on. Slide. Let's go through the next slide as well. And this is the final slide. Just go to the next one, Catherine, if you can. So this is basically our model, our triangle, our pyramid. It's the pyramid of wholehearted living. At the bottom, you want to base your diet either on the leafy green plant foods or the carnivore, and you can include a bit of both. Choose one or the other as the dominant one, and then add little bits of the other to it. But notice there are no carbohydrates in that area. No matter whether you are plant-based or animal-based, fortify with fat. Fat fortification is critically important, particularly as you're dealing with your weight and as you're dealing with the lipedema. Develop intermittent fasting. I haven't eaten yet today. I'll eat tonight after this talk. That's a 23-1. Eat sequentially. I'll put a lot of food on the table in the middle, and I'll be upset because I only end up eating a tiny amount, but very gratified at the end. Have your bridge drinks, whether it's coffee, whether it's water, whether it's green tea, whether it's Crystal Light. Develop those endorphin alternatives. Develop those alternative skill sets, those more effective emotion management sets, and add salt to your food. But also, add salt to your life. It's okay to cry from time to time. It's okay to go for a walk on the beach if you're close to it. Salt is a part of our lives. And that's the end of my talk.
Thank you. You can see, everyone, why we talked and talked and talked for such a long time. This was absolutely fabulous. And what I love, Dr. Cywes, is your ability to take complex concepts and to make them very accessible. So the last thing I want to say, if I can find my presentation, give me 1 second. I just want to remind folks that we're in the middle of here. We're not even in the middle. We just started, actually. We're just on day 2 of the summit. And here, let me just show this. We have over 40 experts, all on different aspects of lipedema and keto. One of the things that Leslyn and I explored quite a bit is this whole notion of carnivore. I have to say, from a personal point of view, I'm like shocked, totally shocked. Dr. Cywes just happened to be coming to Boston. We got together and had a conversation in the lobby of the hotel where he was staying at a conference. And he shared a lot of this with me. And I said, what the hell? Let me try it. It's amazing. It works. At least it works for me. So anyway, my purpose was to say, if you aren't already registered for the summit, please do. We have wonderful talks coming up. So thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. And if you aren't already, come and join our summit. And we have another keynote next Saturday. And then Leslyn and I will be doing a, what are we calling it? A grand finale, where we talk a lot about what we've done and what we've learned next Sunday. So thank you all, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
See you, everyone. Bye.